So House Bill 5364 would raise the tipped minimum wage in Rhode Island for the first time in nearly 20 years. For some historical context, in 1996, the regular minimum wage in Rhode Island was $4.45 per hour, and the tipped minimum wage was $2.89 per hour. Today, nearly 20 years later, the regular minimum wage is $9 an hour, and the tipped minimum wage is still just $2.89 an hour. What that means is that a tip is no longer a way to say to your server, thanks for the great service. It is now paying your server's base salary. And that has translated to real hardships for a lot of Rhode Islanders. While we've all heard a story about a bartender who might, make hundreds and hundreds of dollars on a really busy night, we know that this is not the norm. The norm for many tipped workers is frequent instability and economic insecurity. According to the most recent Bureau of Labor Statistics report, the average hourly wage, including gratuities for tipped servers in Rhode Island, was $8.90. Tipped workers have higher poverty rates and are twice as likely to be on food stamps as non-tipped workers in our state. That's the reality. And that's why I introduced House Bill 5364 to provide a measure of added security for thousands of hardworking Rhode Islanders by gradually raising the sub-minimum wage, beginning with a bump to $4.50 in 2016 until it's even with the regular minimum wage, giving a many-year window for businesses to adapt and adjust. Speaking of businesses, I recognize there is a lot of opposition from sectors of the restaurant industry to raising the sub-minimum wage by even a cent. And I don't blame folks for their opposition. Currently, they've got a really good deal, $2.89. It makes sense that some folks wouldn't want to see it changed. But that doesn't mean that what we have now is a good public policy. And while many restaurants do have thin profit margins, and I'm sure we'll hear about that tonight, according to a recent study by Forbes, the restaurant industry is not even on the list of the 15 U.S. industries with the lowest profit margins, all of which have to pay their employees at least the regular minimum wage. The truth is, Rhode Island is trailing our neighbors on this issue. We have the lowest tip minimum wage of any state in New England. Connecticut's sub-minimum wage is $5.69 for servers and $7.39 for bartenders. Last time I checked, Connecticut's restaurant industry was doing great. New York raised their sub-minimum wage to $7.50 for tipped workers. And while you might say that New York City is in a whole other economic league than Rhode Island, this is New York State. We're talking about Rochester, Poughkeepsie, Syracuse, places that are economically very comparable to Rhode Island. Now, I would argue that Rhode Island entrepreneurs are second to none. If business owners in our region can adjust to an increased sub-minimum wage, why would we think that restaurateurs in Rhode Island are any less capable of adjusting to an even more gradual change? And that is saying nothing of the 7 states across the country that have completely eliminated their sub-minimum wage and have just one minimum wage for all workers. These states have a higher or as high industry and job growth rates as sub-minimum wage states. I want to repeat that. I think it's important. The states that have eliminated completely their sub-minimum wage have as high or higher industry and job growth rates as sub-minimum wage states. And as I've heard concern from some of you about whether this would impact tipping, it's worthwhile to note that these states also have as high average tipping rates as sub-minimum wage states, as the vast majority of people already assume that servers make the regular minimum wage, so raising it doesn't impact people's tipping habits. Finally, these states all share significantly lower poverty rates among their tipped workers than sub-minimum wage states like Rhode Island. So raising the tip minimum wage is clearly a win for workers, and there is a tremendous amount of real-world evidence that it can also be a win for businesses. But it goes beyond that. This legislation is also a win for the economy and for our state. When a server's wage goes up, that means they can spend more, and we know that that extra money is going to go right back into Rhode Island businesses, particularly restaurants. An analysis by the Restaurant Opportunity Center found that this legislation would have anywhere from $64 to $130 million in stimulative effect for the state economy. Moreover, this legislation may very well save the taxpayers money, as tip workers in Rhode Island receive $638,000 in food stamps every month, because we have created a system in which the person who serves you your dinner may very well not be able to keep food on her own table. That's not right. In short, I believe this legislation is a win-win-win. After 20 years, it's past time for us to have this conversation, and I thank you all for giving this issue the consideration it deserves. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Does any members of the committee have any questions for Representative Regenberg? Representative Vice Chair Palangio.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative, you mentioned some statistics in reference to what the minimum wage was. How long ago did you say?
So 1996 was the last time there was any movement.
So in 96, the difference between minimum wage and the tipped minimum wage was what? Minimum wage was what in 1996?
Four something.
The regular minimum wage was $4.45. The tip minimum wage was $2.89. So I guess about 2/3.
So would you have objection to making that same spread between the tip minimum wage and the minimum wage? Make that same spread today. So if it was 2/3 of $9.
So the legislation that I submitted, it's designed to have a gradual phase in, and the reason was for businesses to have time to adapt and adjust. Personally, I think that there's a great deal of evidence that eliminating the sub-minimum wage completely leads to the best outcomes for workers and potentially for businesses as well, referencing those industry growth rates. Having said that, I am, as you know, always open to conversation with all of our colleagues to find what is the policy and the specifics that make the most sense and that we think are the best for Rhode Island.
Was that the last time, 96, was that the last time tip minimum wage was addressed?
That's right. It has not moved since 1996, almost 20 years. I was 6 years old the last time the tip minimum wage was moved.
I was like 7.5.
I won't tell you how old I was.
Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Nunes has a question for you.
Thank you, Chairman. I just have a question about the method with which you increase over the 4 years. Is there any rhyme or reason to the percentage of increases over the 4 years? I mean, I just ran the numbers quick, and you have, in the first year, it's a 57% increase. The second year, it would be a 33%, and then it's a 25%, and then a 20%. So, I see how you get up to the $9, but it seems like the first year in particular, you have a substantial jump, and then it kind of peters off after that. Was there any thought? I'm sure there was, but can you explain how you came to the increases, how you did?
So the thinking for the sort of phase was not so much percentages as just the numbers. So the first year, so it's about $1. It's $1.50 a year. The first year it's a little more, just to have the even number up to $4.50, and then it's $1.50 every year. And there's been, and I don't have the name, but I can find it and email it to you.
Yes.
There's been a study by an economist out west that was looking at what is the number that sort of you can reasonably assume that businesses can adjust to that wouldn't be a shock to the system, and it's around $1.50 per year. So that was the logic.
Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Giarrusso.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative, I see you did a lot of research. I'm just wondering, was there ever any research as to how this would impact? Like, this could be a thing that cuts both ways. I'm sure that I'm not in the restaurant business. I would never do that to myself, but and I commend anyone that is, because I'm married to a woman, not to a business. But anyway, if you're increasing somebody's cost,
Absolutely,
they're gonna have to increase their prices. So a check that might be $100 might go to, I don't know, 110, 115. So now if they're going to get a 15 or 20% tip, that's going to be compounded. But that's the first question, if there was research on that. And the other thing is, since 1996, the minimum wage stayed the same. But has anyone checked to see how much a typical dinner for two costed in 1996 versus now? Because, if that went up by twice as much, then 15% is going to be twice as much on today's bill for a dinner for two.
Okay, so to the first question, sorry, remind me, just one word to remind.
If there was a lot of research done to see what the impact would be
Right.
on the business and how much they'd have to raise their prices.
So obviously, I can't foretell exactly what will happen in Rhode Island, but there is a lot of research that we did about what has happened in the other states that have either raised their sub-minimum wage or, as I mentioned, the 7 states that have completely eliminated. Those 7 states do not have higher average menu prices than sub-minimum wage states, and I think we can sort of test it. We can drive over the border into Connecticut and go to sort of an equivalent type restaurant that they have here and see, again, their sub-minimum wage is a little less than double for servers and more than that for bartenders. And to my knowledge and in my experience, I don't see, a big jump in prices when you cross the border into Connecticut. The second question, sorry.
The increase in prices from a typical dinner for two,
Right.
what it was in 96 versus now.
I don't have those numbers, but I know that, again, from having talked to a whole bunch of people now over the last several months who've been reaching out on this issue, I think one of the biggest issues, and probably what we'll hear some of tonight, is people struggling with the instability. If you're relying entirely on tips to make your living, because the 289 goes out all in taxes, so you really, it's entirely tips. There's no stability, and you could get a good tipper or like a big meal, or you could not, and there's no way to know. And so for people to budget, for people to raise families on that, it's really difficult. And I think the numbers that I talked about as far as food stamps, et cetera, sort of bear that out.
Thank you.
Thanks for reminding me.
Any more questions for Representative?